Hi, everybody. I'm Val Wolf. I'm the Executive Director of the Hamilton Clinic for the Occupational Health Clinics for Ontario Workers, otherwise known as OCOW, and I'm really happy to be here today to facilitate this webinar on a very appropriate Frozen Friday, as I mentioned earlier. Are you ready for winter? We better be ready today. And we have two presentations that we're going to do back to back, and then there should be lots of time for questions and conversation at the end. We have the webinar scheduled for an hour and a half, but we will stay on. If there are further questions, we'll stay on until noon if need be. So the two speakers today are Andre Gauvin, our occupational hygienist from our Sudbury or Northern Clinic, and Trevor Schell, who's the ergonomist there. And they are talking about the hazards of working in the cold as well as the ergonomics of snow removal. So I'm going to turn it over to Andre. Thanks.
Thanks, Val. Hi, everyone. I hope you're all having a good morning. So just jump right in here. So snow. This is a lot of snow. These are actual images from 2014. Thank goodness we don't have this much snow yet, but up here in Northern Ontario, we often get close to this. So it's important to be ready and, learn about shoveling safety and efficiency. And we're just going to give you a few pointers today on ergonomics and snow shoveling and how to protect yourself while working in the cold. So here's a little bit of an outline. I'm going to present the working in the cold section. We're going to go over some thermoregulation, acute and chronic health effects, hypothermia and cold injuries, prevention controls, and then Trevor will take over and go over ergonomics and snow shoveling. So preparing yourself for the task, picking the right shovel, snow weight, tips to protect yourself, and using a snowblower. And then there'll be a quick summary after that. So as Canadians, well, especially in Northern Ontario, we've become accustomed to shoveling snow and working outdoors. For a lot of us, it could just be shoveling snow to get out of our driveway, keep the driveways and walkways clean for pedestrians. Some of us work outside. We all go outside just to get to work and to do recreational activities. So some of them, like I said, it is a job requirement for some. So it's important to stay safe while you're out there. So the types of heat loss that you can have. So basically, there's radiation, conduction, convection, and evaporation. It's the same thing for heat gain and heat loss, right? So with radiation, heat is lost through the environment due to temperature gradients. There's a difference in air temperature and the body temperature. So obviously the heat goes to the cold. And then you have conduction, same thing. Heat travels to the cold. So your heat loss is conducted through direct touch of the cold object. So if you touch anything like outside, for example, today, a metal bar or something, it's going to feel cold and you're going to lose the heat through the touch. And convection, heat is lost from the body to the surrounding air as the air moves across the surface. So depending on airspeed, it increases. So you have a greater heat loss if the wind speed around you is faster. So that's where we have the wind chill effect. And then evaporation. So you lose heat through evaporation of a liquid to a gas. So it's when you're sweating or breathing, you'll lose heat that way as well. So thermoregulation. So despite variations in temperature, humans have a good way of maintaining thermal balance with heat gain and heat loss. So what happens when you get cold? So your core temperature drops in your blood, then it sends a signal to your hypothalamus. Okay, well, we have a heat loss here, so it goes to the heat conversion center. It's the same thing for heat gain. So basically with a heat loss, your hypothalamus says, okay, well, we need to produce some heat. So your body goes into your body starts to react to that. So you have vasoconstriction, you have an increased metabolic rate, so your heart rate goes up. You start to shiver, your hair raises, and we'll go through why that happens. So for vasoconstriction, so the arterioles get smaller to reduce the blood going to the skin to keep your core warm. So your extremities actually stay cool while your core temperature stays nice and warm. Then for shivering, what happens is you have rapid contractions. So anytime you might be relaxed, but you're going to shiver because your muscles generate heat. So again, your brain's sending that signal to create heat. And then you have piloerection, which is basically the hair that is raised on your skin. So it gives you like a little bit of an insulated layer. So the hairs on the skin is pulled up by the muscles that you have within your skin. So a layer of warmth of air actually accumulates around the hair, and then heat's retained within the follicle. So that's kind of, if you look at the images, you have some trapped warm air that goes down following the hair, and that kind of helps heat your body. And then the last one is, well, you want to try and make yourself warmer. So you're going to curl up, you're going to make yourself smaller so that you have less surface area that is exposed to the air. So here we have a variation in skin temperature. So thermally comfortable people may have the following skin temperature variations. So your toes are normally around 25 degrees, upper arms and legs around 31 degrees, forehead at 34, and your core temperature is maintained at 37. And when this drops, when the temperature drops, you'll see these drop significantly. So here we have some health effects. So for acute effects, so within seconds, the cool air cools the skin and upper airways, causing a gasping for breath. You can hyperventilate. Sometimes that actually increases, well, from the hyperventilation, it'll increase your heart rate, blood pressure, and that's kind of heat your body. So you'll have the constriction of the blood vessels, so the vasoconstrictions that we talked about to preserve the body's inner core temperature. And this decreases the amount of blood flowing to the skin, which decreases the amount of heat loss. And within minutes, the tissues are cooling, your shivering begins, your neuromuscular activity deteriorates, which will cause a decrease in performance, and frostnip can occur. We'll go through these after. And then within hours, you have declining the ability to perform physical work, which can be dangerous to yourself and others if when you get into the early signs of hypothermia and you're not thinking straight, then accidents happen. So and hypothermia will be apparent, and cold injury will occur. So in the chronic effects, this is actually a good thing, is when acclimatization occurs. So you start getting used to the cold, your body tends to warm itself a lot better. You don't feel as cold when you're out there. The only problem with being exposed to the cold for prolonged periods and chronically is that you have a higher risk for other musculoskeletal disorders like carpal tunnel syndrome and hand-arm vibration syndrome. So here are the stages of hypothermia. So stage 1 is not really hypothermic state until you reach about 35 degrees Celsius. So here you have goosebumps. Those are the types of symptoms you'll see. So goosebumps, you're unable to perform complex tasks because your dexterity is lowered. Shivering can be mild or severe, and your hands start to become numb. And then you have your mild hypothermic state, which is between 35 and 32 degrees Celsius. So you have violent shivering that persists, difficulty speaking, sluggish thinking and movements, amnesia starts, You're unable to use your hands. You stumble frequently. You have difficulty speaking, and signs of depression are usually elevated. And then when you get into the moderate stage, so stage 3, so 32 to 27 degrees Celsius, as your body temperature drops, so your shivering actually stops, and your exposed skin turns blue. So it's basically frozen. You're unable to walk. You get confused, incoherent. You're irrational. Your muscles become rigid. You're semi-conscious. You have a loss of awareness of others. Your pulse and respiratory rate decrease, and there's likely some heart fibrillation. So it's pretty complicated at that stage. And then in stage 4, it's severe. So this is where you can become incautious. Your heartbeat and breathing are erratic. You might not be able to have a palpable pulse. You have pulmonary edema can start, cardiac and respiratory failure, and death. And death can actually occur before this temperature is reached, so in the moderate stage as well. And there's actually been the lowest recorded core temperature for survivor of accidental hypothermia is 14.4 degrees Celsius. So that's very low, and very surprising that someone survived that. So cold injury. So we'll start with the frost nip. So this is a mildest type of injury. It is reversible. Basically, it's ice crystal formation on the skin surface. So the exposed person is not usually aware of that they have frost nip. It's current because it's usually painless and develops really slowly, depending on the temperature, obviously. But if it's really cold out, it'll develop quicker. It affects the earlobes, fingers, cheeks, toes, nose, the extremities mostly. Frostbite. So this is actually when your skin freezes. So the blood vessels in the skin, especially hands and feet, constrict in cold conditions to preserve the core body temperature. So if for prolonged periods of time, this starves the peripheral tissues and nutrients in their heat supply. So over a short period of time, it could be reversed, but over a long period of time, it'll start some cell necrosis. So the cells start to die. And this is where it's actually called frostbite. So it's caused by actual freezing of the soft tissue. And it's often seen in extremely cold temperatures and wind. So usually it starts with bare skin because it could freeze a lot faster if you have nothing covering it. So at minus 20 degrees Celsius, your bare skin will begin to freeze. So obviously exposed areas are most often affected. So cheeks, ears, fingers, toes, those are usually the first places. It begins with local sweat, swelling and redness and numbness, and then your skin whitens with a waxy appearance, and if it's deep, the skin will feel hard. So chilblains, this is just another level. It's painful inflammation of small blood vessels in your skin that occurs in response to repeat exposure to cold but not freezing air. So it's also known as perennial, and chilblains causes itching, red patches, swelling and blistering for your hands and feet. So it's basically a trench foot, which is something they came up with, or not in World War I and II for the military. This is the injury they used to have because they were always cold and wet. It wasn't freezing, but cold and wet, so they called it trench foot. So it's a severe form of disability that happens when your skin is wet and cold for prolonged periods. So your skin reddens, then pales. The skin then breaks away and decays, as well as contract infection. So 2 to 3 days following rewarming, you'll have increased pain, swelling, redness, heat and blistering, possible gangrene from infection, cold and chronic cold sensitivity, excessive perspiration, and excessive pigmentation may occur. So frequency of injuries, so it's estimated that 64% of cold injuries involve the hands. then followed, or hands or feet, and then followed by nose and ears. According to WSIB, there's about 60 cases of cold injuries that are reported each year. So in terms of risk factors, obviously age is a big one. Older adults have decreased circulation, so you want to make sure that you try and prevent that as much as possible. Poor nutrition, fatigue, so the body can be run down and less able to protect itself from hazards. So obviously nutrition is big, and making sure that you have proper fluids in you. Alcohol and smoking, that affects blood vessels and body's ability to control temperature. So alcohol is a vasodilator and smoking is a vasoconstrictor, so they kind of contradict themselves. Uh, so that's one of the reasons why, around Christmas time, when you may have had a little bit too much to drink, you can go outside and you don't feel cold at all, and that's one of the reasons. The problem with alcohol is actually it's cooling your body faster because it's a vasodilator. Your hands and feet are actually bringing more warm blood to the extremities, so they're cooling your body off faster. And then medications, so narcotics, tranquilizers, antidepressants, and blood pressure medication, they all decrease circulation to the skin. So more risk factors for cold stress. So certain health conditions such as diabetes and heart disease affect circulatory systems. So again, you want to try and, if you have these diseases, you want to make sure that you're protecting yourself adequately. Inadequate, tight, wet clothing, previous cold injuries makes you prone to recurring injuries, and Raynaud's phenomenon. So spasms of the blood vessels that result in reduced blood flow and discoloration of the affected areas, so white to red to blue, or to blue to red, sorry. So factors affecting cold perception. So acclimation. So if you're not acclimatized, it's going to feel colder. The wind chill is a big one. Physical fitness. So if you're physically fit, usually you feel warmer. And moisture in the air. Activity, equipment design, clothing, time of day. Obviously midday when the sun's out, it feels a lot warmer than at night, and duration of exposure. So here we're going to go through the wind chill effect. So this is all adapted from the ACGIH. If you look at, just a regular day at 3 degrees Celsius with no wind chill, it stays at 3 degrees, or at, yeah. And then as the wind increases, you'll see that the temperature increases to -12, or again, if you go to, it's a cold day at -21, you have a wind chill of 25 miles per hour or 40 kilometers per hour. Then the next thing you know, it's feeling closer to -51 degrees, which is dangerous in terms of having cold injuries. So these are the suggested exposure limits. Work to rest ratios basically. So -26 to 28 with no wind, work as normal. Take breaks obviously as you normally would. Then it kind of shifts as you get past the -30 mark. Once you get past -30, your work to rest ratio turns around. So you can work for 75 minutes and 2 breaks within that 75 minutes, and then on and off from there. You just keep going with your day. So, and as you go down the list, you'll see. And anything below -43, then you shouldn't be working unless it's an emergency. So employers need to ensure that their workers are safe from having or from hazards of working in the cold. So the cold decreases efficiency of workers, decreases mental capacity, and increases the number of accidents on the job. So obviously, this is a big stressor for employers. They got to try and keep their workers as warm as possible, and it's important for any employer to keep their employees safe. So here are some controls that you can put in place. So obviously education is a big one. So workers and supervisors should be informed about the symptoms of adverse health effects of cold exposure, proper clothing habits, safe work practices, emergency procedures in case of a cold injury. Again, another control is acclimatization. So making sure that your workers are acclimatized. So you take them in steps. So the body's ability to get used to cold temperatures. It is easier for the body to adapt to hot environments rather than cold ones. So you take it gradually. Over 7 to 10 days, the person starts to become acclimatized. It takes about 14 days fully acclimatize. Um, a fit person will acclimatize more rapidly than an unfit person. And it's recommended for all new workers and those returning from any extended leave. So other administrative controls, you can provide heat and warming shelters, self-paced working, so encourage self-paced working so that if there's any heavy sweating, they can manage themselves. Because obviously the more you sweat, once you stop, you'll get cold a lot faster. Make sure the rest periods are in warm settings. Using threshold limit values as a warm-up schedule is important. Change your clothes to dry ones often, and make sure that your new employees are acclimatized and they have protective clothing before starting a full workload. So surveillance and monitoring. So every workplace where the temperature might fall below 16 degrees Celsius should have a suitable thermometer to monitor any further temperature changes. For workplaces with temperatures below the freezing point, the temperature should be monitored at least every 4 hours. And for indoor workplaces, whenever the rate of air movement exceeds 2 meters per second or 5 miles per hour, it should be recorded every 4 hours. And this is all, for prevention, right? They're not if you're working outside below freezing point and you notice that there's a big shift in temperature drop, then you want to adjust the way that your workers are working out there. In outdoor workplaces, the air temperature below the freezing point, so anything below -1, both air temperature and wind speed should be recorded. Again, that wind chill effect does do big things. So if it does make it feel a lot colder, so it's important to record that. So engineering control, so provide radiant heaters that can be used to warm the workers. Shielding is a big one. So if there's any drafts or winds, if you can shield yourself away from that. Use insulating materials on equipment handles when temperature drops below -1 degree Celsius. Wind barriers have been found effective outdoors or in freezer rooms to control circulated air. A refugee, so access to a warm spot, warm conditions, and warm drinks during rest. So a lot of people who work outside, their refuge is actually the running truck. They keep their truck running or their vehicle running, and that's where they warm up. The design of equipment, so gloves and mittens do not need to be removed when you operate equipment. And design of workplaces, so operators are not required to sit or stand for long periods of time. So it's good that they're moving as much as possible just to keep that blood flowing. So safe work practices, you can change out your wet clothes and footwear as soon as you can. Do not touch cold objects with your bare hands. Always wear gloves or protective gear. People are taking certain medications, so blood pressure medication or narcotics, either older age, overweight, have allergies, smoke, or have poor blood flow, are more prone to cold injuries, so you should take extra precaution of these people. Try not to drink alcohol when you're going to be in cold areas, especially. Avoid getting clothing or gloves wet with any liquids such as gasoline, cleaning fluids, just because of the evaporation effect. As it evaporates, your sweat is going right through the glove basically at that point. and you're going to get cold a lot faster. For work below minus 25 degrees Celsius, follow the work warm schedule that the ACGIH has. So you also have to take into account the wind speed and air temperature. Always work in a buddy system. So if you have to work outside, make sure you have someone with you, especially in colder conditions. If anything happens, they're there to help you or report it. Try to work in pairs, keep an eye out on each other, watch for signs of cold stress. Avoid using vibratory tools. Wear UV protected eyewear because obviously the sun is still out there, and when it hits the snow, you have a big snow glare. It's actually a stronger reflection. And drink plenty of liquids. Avoid caffeine and alcohol as much as possible. Heavy work should be scheduled during the warmer parts of the day and take breaks out of the cold. So again, if you have to be outside, schedule it, between 11 and 2 p.m. It's usually the warmest part of the day. Anytime after that, the sun starts to go down and it gets cold real fast. So clothing, personal protective equipment. Clothing should be worn in multiple layers. This provides a better safety than a thick garment. The air between the layers is actually what your insulation. It provides better insulation. So if your layers are too tight, then you have less air in between the layers, and your insulation is less. So several layers actually give you the option to open or to remove a layer before you get too warm and start sweating, or to add a layer when you take a break and you get cold. So successive outer layers should be larger than the inner layer. Otherwise, the outermost layer will compress the inner layers and will decrease the insulation properties of clothing. So the innermost layer, should provide insulation, be able to wick moisture away from the skin. This will help keep it dry. So the underwear should be made of polyester or polypropylene that's suitable for wicking moisture. The additional layers should provide adequate insulation for the weather conditions under which the work is being done. So obviously you want to dress appropriately for the weather. If it's not too cold, you don't want to be overdressed. If it's really cold, you want to make sure you have layers. Should be easy to remove and to open. If you get too warm, you can always remove some clothing. And then the outer jacket should have the means of closing off and opening the waist, neck, and wrist to help prevent control of heat loss that is retained or given off. And then some jackets have some netted pockets and vents around the trunk and under the arms that can be zipped open or closed for added ventilation possibilities, which these are good, especially if you're working and you're starting to take layers off. Before you take a layer off, you can open the Velcros or the zippers to start ventilating, and then you're going to sweat a lot less. So if ever you're working wet conditions, you should try and have a waterproof jacket. Wear a hat. 50% of the body heat is lost through the head. Clothing should be kept clean since the dirt clogs the air cells and fibers. It'll actually destroy the insulating effect if it's dirty. And obviously the clothing must be dry. If it's wet at any point, it defeats the purpose. For anything below negative 17 degrees, polyester gloves are recommended to be worn under protective gloves. So again, double layer is always better. Face protection should be used, so using a balaclava or hard hat liner just to make sure you're covering as much skin as possible when it gets to temperatures that low. So your footwear, felt-lined rubber bottom leather boots with removable felt insoles are the best for working in the cold. The reason for that is because the leather is porous and it actually allows the boot to breathe, so your sweat evaporates. Leather boots can also be waterproof with products that do not block the pores in the leather. So if you get into rubber boots that you're wearing all the time, depending. Some of the new ones actually breathe, that they have a felt that wicks away the material. If you have those, that's fine. But if you have the ones that don't, then you start to sweat quite a bit more, and your feet will actually get cold faster. However, if you're working in the water or in slush or something like that, then waterproof boots are very important. So that's when you get into the rubber boots. So again, if you're gonna have rubber boots for your everyday, you want to make sure that you have a wicking material in your felt so that it takes away the moisture as much as possible. When trying on boots before you purchase, make sure you wear the same socks that you would wear at work. This is important, just to ensure proper fit. Um, if you don't do that, and you start wearing thicker socks or thinner socks, then if it's too tight, it'll compress and you lose the insulation factor. And composite boots, or instead of steel toe boots, are recommended as well. Composite boots conduct the cold less than a steel toed would. The socks, one thick pair is good, or bulky socks, or two pairs. So the inner sock could be silk, nylon, or wool, as long as they're thinner, and the outer sock should be slightly larger, just so that you're not compressing the insulation effect of the thinner sock. Uh, Liner socks, again, made of polypropylene. It'll help keep your feet dry because it wicks the material or the sweat away. And when the outer sock becomes damp, obviously the insulation properties decrease, so have extra socks available so that you can dry your feet and change your socks. So if two pairs of socks are worn, the outer sock should be larger so that the inner sock is not compressed. Again, the outer sock will usually be the one that gets wet before the inner sock if you have a wicking material on the inner sock. So having a couple pairs of the outer sock is probably your best bet, rather than carrying 4 pairs of socks on you all the time. Maybe 1 or 2 of the outer socks should be enough. So again, always wear the right thickness of your socks and your boots. Too thick, the boot will be too tight, and the sock will lose much of the insulation properties. The foot could also be squeezed, which will slow the blood flow and decrease to the feet and increase the risk of cold injuries. And if socks are too thin, the boots will fit loosely and may lead to other issues like blisters. So eye protection, we still need to wear safety glasses when we're working outdoors. So where face protection is used, eye protection must be separated from the nose and mouth to prevent exhaled moisture from fogging and frosting the eye shields or glasses. So select protective eyewear that's appropriate for the work that you're doing. And for protection against ultraviolet light from the sun, glare and snow, blowing snow and ice crystals, and high winds and at cold temperatures. So again, we want to prevent excessive sweating while working. Remove clothing in the following order to do that. So if you're starting to sweat while you're working hard out there, start by just removing your mitts and gloves, unless you obviously need protection. Then your headgear and scarf would be the next thing. You kind of work from the extremities towards your core. Then you open your jacket at the waist, wrists, remove a layer of clothing. And then as you cool down, you would do the same in the reverse order. So you'd put your jacket back on, or put your layers back on, put your jacket back on, then your headgear, mitts, and gloves. So do's and don'ts of cold stress. So do cover your hands and feet, face, and eyes. Continue moving. That's important. Keep that blood flowing. Dress in layers of loose, dry, protective clothing. Take many breaks in warm places, and eat properly to preserve heat and prevent dehydration. So don't consume alcohol or drugs that may change the blood flow, unless obviously it's medically prescribed. And try not to enter any cold weather conditions after a recent shower or bath. It'll increase the rate at which you can have frostbite or frostnip. So now we're going to send this over to Trevor.